Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be discussing the book Room by Emma Donoghue. This video is going to be a comparison between the book and the movie. This story is following Ma and Jack. And Ma was kidnapped when she was 17, 18 years old. And Jack was born being held hostage. He has no idea that he's being held hostage because Mom has kind of shielded him from that. All he knows is that him and Ma live in this room, and this guy that they call Old Nick comes in every now and then and gives him supplies and hangs out with Ma for a little bit. And this story was so good. And one of the big differences between the book and the movie that I think the book was able to do because of the medium is that Jack was able to tell the story from his own perspective. Whereas the movie doesn't really give as much of his own thoughts and feelings. There is a little bit of a voiceover with the movie so that you can get more of his thoughts, but you're submerged into his world and thoughts and feelings with the book. And I think that was just fantastic for the book. I think that was something that was a very interesting choice that the author chose to do. And I think that it worked super, super well. I think that it gives it a very different perspective than other types of stories told with the same sort of concept. And I think that being able to see his thoughts and feelings, especially because he doesn't know what's happening, he doesn't understand things. And so when he describes things, he describes them from a 5-year-old, but it's also because he's a 5-year-old who doesn't understand other things. So when he's watching TV and he's seeing people on the TV, he believes that those people just exist in the TV. They're not actual people being actors. They just don't exist at all. Same thing with animals and toys and cars and things like that. None of it exists outside of the TV. And you get to really be immersed in his mindset with those kinds of things because of the book and being able to see it from his perspective. The movie does a really good job of following Jack, and like I said, there were some voiceovers that help give you some of his perspective, but the movie wasn't able to do it as well as the book, just because of the medium. With the movie and the book, the movie does a really good job of following the book pretty much step by step up until the time when they're getting ready to make their great escape. And one of the differences was that they end up making Old Nick mad. And because he's punishing them, he decides that he's going to turn the power off to their shed. And it's wintertime. And because of this, they freeze all day long. And their plant dies. And they go several days without heat and without power of any sort. And in the movie, they only go what looks like a day in without the power. And so that was a little bit different, but that's not a huge difference. It also seemed like it moved a little bit quicker through that portion of the buildup with them living in the captivity. And I think that that's probably moving pacing. Like, movies have to move you along a lot faster. And I think that that's probably what that was. But in the book, when they're getting ready for their great escape, they do multiple hours of him practicing being sick and of him pretending to be dead. And you don't really see that as much in the movie. It seems much, much faster. Whereas in the book, you got to see him struggle with, one, learning that everything is real and they're being held captive, and then having to figure out, how do I pretend to be sick? And how do I pretend to be dead when I'm 5 and I don't understand a whole lot of things? And so you see a little bit more of that struggle in the book, which I really appreciated, because we all love those scenes where people struggle and grow and get better, and the movie sort of fast paced that. One of the other things that was very different about The Great Escape was when Jack jumps out of the back of the truck. he is supposed to run into like this family and this dog, and he sees this dog for the first time, and he knows what it is, but he's never interacted with the dog before. And he's supposed to have this interaction with the dog and this dude, but he doesn't have any of that in the movie because when he jumps out of the truck, he runs into this one dude. And then the cops' names were a little bit different, which I don't know why the cops' names were any different because it's not a big deal. So I mean, it wasn't a big deal if they changed it. It just seemed weird that they would change their names. Um, but I think that they did a really good job of replicating him trying to explain where he's from, because one of the things that made it really hard to find his mother, because he's the only one that escaped, right? I didn't explain that very well, but he's the only one who escaped. And he's supposed to find help and then come back and get her. And one of the struggles is that he has no idea where he lives. He doesn't know what color the house is. He doesn't know anything other than the shed. And he doesn't even know what that looks like, and he doesn't even know how to describe things. And so I think that in the book and the movie, the cops did a really good job of piecing all of that together. And I think that they did a really good job interacting with him and being patient in both mediums. And so I thought that was really good. In the book, they end up going to this clinic and they end up staying there for several days. In the movie, fast tracked that completely. They only stayed for about 24 hours and then they were gone. And I loved that part of the book when they were at this clinic because it gave Jack an opportunity to sort of acclimate to everything. He's never interacted with people. He's only interacted with his mom and with old Nick. And now he's having to interact with all these people and he's interacting with these doctors. And I think that giving him that time at the clinic was really important because it sort of eased him into things. Whereas in the movie, they went straight to grandma's. And so he's living with multiple other people who he's never met. And I think that it was a little bit rushed. And so I really loved the book for that purpose because they were able to really slow things down and able to allow him to interact with other people. And you get to see that progress of him learning how to interact with people and learning how to be touched by other people and him touch other people. And one thing that they both did really well, to an extent, was the fact that like he's never been exposed to illness or bacteria and all those kinds of things. And so in both mediums, they made him wear masks. And um, in the movie, they didn't wear them as long as they did in the book, mostly because they left the clinic pretty quickly, but also because the doctor was like, well, I mean, if you don't want him to, then you don't want him to. I don't care. But in the books, they kind of were like, he actually really needs to because he's never been exposed to anything. And so that was a little bit rushed for me. And then what I really didn't like about the movie was that in the book, they actually explain that he needs to wear long sleeves and he needs to go slowly out going outside because he's never been out there. And in the book, he ends up going with grandma and they go to the park and she doesn't take him any jackets or t-shirts or anything like long sleeves. And he gets a sunburn and he's never had a sunburn. And he gets stung by a bee and he doesn't even know, what that feels like. And they didn't do those things in the movie, which I didn't really like. One change that they did in the movie was in the book, he was supposed to go with his uncle to this museum, and they ended up going to the mall with his daughter and his wife, and it was this whole big thing. And they took that out from the movie, which is fine. I think that was a fine choice because it really didn't serve any purpose other than him stealing a book because he doesn't know that he has to pay for it. And so that wasn't super important. A couple of things that I really missed from the book that they didn't do in the movie was he's never worn shoes. And so in the book, when he's wearing shoes, he's constantly taking them off because they're heavy. And In the movie, they didn't even show that at all. He had shoes on when he got to grandma's, and then I think they mentioned him wearing his shoes, and that was it. Whereas in the book, it was kind of a recurring thing for a little while that he would keep taking the shoes off. And one of the cutest scenes in the book was he would go downstairs, and he's never been downstairs. He doesn't know what stairs really are. And so he sits down and he slides on his butt down the stairs. And they didn't do that with the movie at all. They had the opportunity because they showcased the stairs and they paused it, and so like you could see that it was an issue for him and it was a big deal. But then Ma just carries him down, and I think that was an opportunity missed because I think that that really showed like his fear, and then you get to see his growth later on in the book because he actually walks down the stairs, and we didn't get to see that growth in the movie because they didn't do it in the movie. One thing that the movie did differently from the book, but they did do it equally as well, was his relationship with his step grandfather, who he calls Steppa, because he's a step grandfather. His name is Leo. And Jack takes to him pretty quickly in the book because he comes to him and he has some Legos and they play Legos and he learns how to play Legos. And so they kind of bond over that. In the movie, they bond over the fact that he has a dog and Jack has always wanted a dog, and so they kind of get to bond over that. And I think that even though they did it differently, they still both did it really well because that was an important relationship to him in the book, and it still got to be an important relationship in the movie. One thing that the movie didn't do very well with was they didn't showcase a lot of his separation anxiety because there's a point where Ma attempts to overdose, and so she has to go to the hospital and Jack stays with grandma and grandpa by himself. And in the book, grandma is trying to get him to go to sleep downstairs and he's like, no. And so then she like takes him upstairs and she's like, here's your mom's old bedroom. It's right next to our bedroom. You can sleep in here. And it's like, no. And so then they get a blow up mattress and they put it in grandma's bedroom and he gets to sleep there. But she lays him down and then she's trying to go watch TV. And he's like, no, I go where you go. And so it ended up where she ended up having to come lay down with him because he wouldn't go to sleep if she wasn't there. Because that's how he's grown up. He's never slept alone. And so part of that growth was not shown in the movie. And you didn't really get to see a lot of his growth with grandma. I think they kind of like told versus showing a lot of that because in the movie, he does tell grandma that he loves her, and she's actually the first person that we hear him say that to outside of his mom. And I think that that was just a little bit rushed. Um, but one thing that the movie did do very well was giving us little snippets of what's going on in mom's head. Because at one point, she and Jack are sitting in the floor and she's going through some old yearbooks from her old friends. And she makes comments about how they just went on and lived their lives and they didn't have to deal with trauma and their lives have been so peaceful. And so you get to see a little bit of that bitterness that she's experiencing because of the fact that her life has been completely changed in the last 7 years. And something else that she did that we got to see in the movie was she had a verbal altercation with mom where we get to see a little bit more of that anger coming out. Because in the book, we spend that time with her when we're held captive, and then with mom, we're captive with mom, and then we spend that week in the clinic. But mom's had a couple of really down days, and so she's not getting out of bed at all. So we're not really interacting with her. And then she overdoses while at the clinic. And so we go to grandma's. And so we don't really see a lot of her in that last half of the book. And so we didn't really get to see any of that trauma coming out for her. And so that was really cool in the movie. And then one of the other things that the movie does really well is that they get to show Jack's future. Jack gets to have a friend and you get to see him playing with his friend. And it's really heartwarming to see that even though he's gone through so much trauma, he still has a pretty good future ahead. Whereas the book didn't really do that. The book just ended on him going to see room where they grew up. And that's how that was the last that you got to see there. Now, the movie did have the same ending where he went and saw room, and his kind of his perspective of it had changed quite a bit since he had grown, because that was his whole world and it seemed like a huge world until you see the actual world, and now it feels really small. And so we got to see that change in perspective in both. But the ending, part of the ending was that he got to have a friend, which he had never had before. And so overall, I do think that the book was better, but I think that the book was better just because we could be in Jack's perspective a little bit more. And we got to see a little bit more of how things affected him versus the movie. The movie is a very, very good depiction of this book, though. The things that were changed are very minor, and they don't make a huge difference in the story itself, just in how much we get to see of his growth and his trauma. And I don't know. I think it was pretty good. Have you seen this movie? Have you read this book? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.